The morning of the 15th of January, 1947, began like any other in Los Angeles, with a pale winter sun struggling to pierce through the city's lingering haze. On Norton Avenue, a quiet residential stretch south of Hollywood, the world seemed suspended between the ordinary and the unreal. A mother, walking with her young child, stopped suddenly at the edge of an empty lot. At first, she thought she was looking at a discarded mannequin. The body was pale, too pale, the kind of whiteness that seemed drained of life itself. It was not plastic, it was flesh. Elizabeth Short lay severed in two at the waist, her remains posed with eerie precision in the brittle grass. Her arms bent upwards at right angles, her mouth slashed grotesquely into a permanent, distorted smile. The scene was as silent as a tableau, the mutilation deliberate and theatrical, as if the killer had staged his own grim exhibition. The neighborhood, still half asleep, was about to awaken to one of the most infamous murders in American history. The child tugged at his mother's hand. She pulled him away, but the image could not be unseen. Word spread quickly, carried from porch to porch, whispered over fences, then relayed to the police. Officers soon arrived, their boots pressing into damp earth, their breath visible in the cool air. They crouched over the body and did not speak for several long moments. In the distance, traffic hummed along busy boulevards, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded. Elizabeth Short was only 22. The body's condition suggested time and care, hours of cruel ritual. She had been washed clean, drained of blood, cut with surgical precision, not merely killed, but arranged, as though the violence itself carried meaning beyond murder. Reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing, their notebooks trembling with anticipation of headlines. Within hours, the story escaped the neighborhood and spread like wildfire across the city. The anonymity of the young woman ended with the stroke of a pen on a police report. Her name was Elizabeth Short, though soon the press would give her another, the Black Dahlia. A name so alluring, so strange, it fused beauty with menace. The name would come to overshadow the woman herself. As detectives began their work, the morning fog lifted, revealing the ordinary hum of Los Angeles once more. Houses stood quietly, laundry lines hung in the air. Children played under watchful eyes. But there was something new in the city now, a chill, a sense that beneath the glamour and sunshine lay something cold and unspeakable. Elizabeth's body was taken away, covered in a white sheet. Yet the imprint of that ghastly smile, the unnatural stillness of her limbs, lingered in every onlooker's mind. The lot where she was found would be scraped clean, but the memory remained, etched into the city's conscience like a scar. There is a cruel irony in beginnings. Elizabeth's story, as the Black Dahlia, began only after her life had ended. In death, she became unforgettable, but the silence of that empty lot, broken only by the caw of a crow, circling overhead, seemed to whisper that the truth would never be easily found. For every case that shocks, there is a moment where time itself feels suspended. The 15th of January was such a morning, when a mother's gasp, a policeman's stare, and the whisper of a name began a legend that has never faded. Long before she became the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short was a young woman chasing the fragile promise of belonging in a city that rarely kept its promises. Born in Boston in 1924, Elizabeth's early life was shaped by loss and restlessness. Her father abandoned the family during the Depression, faking his own death before reappearing years later. The absence carved something into Elizabeth, an ache for stability, for recognition, perhaps even for escape. She left home young, drifting between Massachusetts and Florida, before the glittering mirage of Los Angeles called to her. She was striking, with jet black hair and pale skin that drew comparisons to porcelain. Friends recalled her preference for dark dresses and crimson lipstick, a style that seemed almost theatrical against the sunny streets of California. She looked like someone who might already belong to the movies, even if her name was never on a marquee. The city of illusions welcomed many like her dreamers. who stepped off buses with little more than a suitcase and a story they rehearsed for themselves on the ride in. Elizabeth wanted to act, to model, to find her way into the orbit of Hollywood. But ambition often outpaced opportunity. She lived a transient life, relying on acquaintances and temporary romances for shelter and survival. Men were often drawn to her, offering companionship, promises, or escape routes, but none gave her the stability she seemed to need. She moved from hotel rooms to rented apartments, from one borrowed couch to another. Always beautiful, always visible, yet strangely rootless. The name Dahlia was whispered before her death, inspired by her fondness for black clothing and the 1946 noir film The Blue Dahlia. In that movie, betrayal, murder, and secrets unravel in the smoky underworld of Los Angeles. Elizabeth seemed to walk through life like one of those screen heroines, enigmatic, alluring, forever on the edge of some great drama. And perhaps she cultivated that air, dressing the part of the mysterious starlet who had not yet been discovered. But beneath the surface shimmered contradiction. Friends described her as warm, affectionate, eager to belong. Others spoke of her as evasive, drifting, difficult to pin down. She could be charming in company, then vanish for days. She lived in two worlds at once, the hopeful young woman waiting for her big break, and the wandering figure who seemed already haunted by shadows. Los Angeles of the 1942nd was both paradise and predator. Neon lights burned late into the night, but so did the secrets of the city's underbelly illegal clubs, corrupt officials, violent men hidden behind polished smiles. To arrive young and alone in such a place was to risk becoming both invisible and dangerously visible. Elizabeth walked this tightrope every day, her life threaded with precarious encounters. The symbol that hovers here is a mirror. In countless Hollywood apartments, Elizabeth likely stood before one, applying lipstick with care, smoothing her dark hair, rehearsing a look that might catch a casting director's eye. The mirror reflected possibility, but also fragility. A woman shaping herself into the image the city demanded, even as the city's appetite consumed countless others like her. Philosophers have written that dreams can both sustain and destroy, that the image of what we long for can blur into the thing we fear. Elizabeth's pursuit of beauty, love, and fame kept her moving through the lonely streets of Los Angeles. But it also placed her in the path of men who might see her not as a woman, but as an object, an illusion to be possessed or destroyed. By the time she reached her final weeks, Elizabeth was a woman, caught between promise and peril. She had no permanent address, no steady job, no fixed circle of friends. She was both everywhere and nowhere in the city. To some, she was just another hopeful starlet who hadn't found her light. To others, she was already unforgettable, and yet, in photographs that remain, she is smiling shy, but radiant, as if she believed her moment was still ahead. In those frozen images, the Black Dahlia does not yet exist. There is only Elizabeth Short, waiting for her story to begin. In the weeks and months that followed her death, Elizabeth Short ceased to be remembered as a young woman. She became a story, a name, an image whispered with fascination and dread. The Black Dahlia. The press coined it swiftly, almost carelessly, and the public devoured it. Newspapers gave the nickname a headline sheen, elevating the brutality of her death into spectacle. The name suggested beauty and danger in the same breath, like a poisonous flower blooming in shadow. It was a transformation as cruel as the crime itself. The living Elizabeth Short laughing in cafes, writing hopeful letters home, dressing carefully in front of a small mirror, was drowned out by the myth. The Black Dahlia was the city's invention, a woman painted in mystery, her tragedy consumed as entertainment, but the myth had roots in her choices. Elizabeth's penchant for black clothing, her striking makeup, and her preference for dark curls gave her a silhouette that stood apart from the sun-drenched crowds. She was not blending in. She was performing, perhaps unconsciously, for an audience she could not yet see. In the smoky undercurrent of Los Angeles nightlife, such self-presentation became a signal. Enigmatic, glamorous, maybe even dangerous. Some who knew her recalled her as sweet and approachable, laughing with strangers and eager to be liked. Others remembered a darker tone, a woman who drifted between men without commitment, who seemed to carry secrets she rarely shared. Her life had become a series of contrasts, and those contradictions made her all the more fascinating after her death. In Hollywood, where women's identities were often reshaped by studio contracts and marketing, Elizabeth's posthumous reinvention was eerily fitting. But unlike an actress who gained a screen name to further her career, Elizabeth's new title erased her entirely. The Black Dahlia was no longer a person, but a symbol of the city's darkest desires, beauty marred by violence, the glamour of youth colliding with the grotesque. Los Angeles, after all, was a city where shadows lived comfortably beside light. The neon of Sunset Boulevard glimmered, while, just a block away, alleys held whispered transactions and broken lives. Elizabeth, whether knowingly or not, existed at the intersection of these worlds. Her death made her the ultimate emblem, the dream that turned to nightmare. The press indulged in lurid details, painting her as both victim and temptress. Some newspapers portrayed her as a wayward girl, reckless, promiscuous, living off men. Others cast her as an innocent, destroyed by a monstrous predator. Both depictions were performances in ink, reflecting more about society's imagination than about Elizabeth herself. The truth of her character, complex, shifting, real, was lost beneath the headlines. Here, the motif of a mask emerges. In life, Elizabeth wore one that the city required, the hopeful starlet, the alluring young woman. In death, another mask was placed upon her, the Dahlia, the eternal mystery, the dark flower. Both masks obscured the face beneath. A deeper reflection lingers in this transformation. Human beings crave narrative. We want stories that simplify, that assign clear roles of heroine and villain. Yet Elizabeth's life defied such neat categories. By turning her into the Black Dahlia, the city and its press reduced her to a single image, alluring, doomed, silent. Perhaps that silence was what captivated the public most. A woman who could no longer correct the story told about her. In the years since, her name has become inseparable from her death. We say the Black Dahlia, and think not of Elizabeth Short, but of a body in an empty lot, a riddle never solved, a face framed by darkness. Her humanity was eclipsed by her myth, and that myth continues to bloom like a black flower in the imagination of a city that thrives on stories. Elizabeth's life was brief, transient, and complicated. But in death, she became eternal. A girl in black, walking through the smoky dream of Hollywood, her footsteps fading but her shadow never disappearing. Los Angeles, in the late 1942nd, was a place split between light and shadow, a city that seemed to thrive on duality. To the east, factory chimneys still smoked from wartime industry, while in Hollywood the glow of neon signs promised dreams for those who dared to chase them. At night, the streets pulsed with jazz, laughter, and the hum of automobiles. Yet beneath this rhythm ran another current, one of crime, corruption, and secrets whispered in dark alleys. Elizabeth Short had walked these streets often. She drifted between neighborhoods, moving through the city like a figure searching for a place to land. She haunted cafes, hotel lobbies, small bars where musicians played late into the night. Her striking appearance made her memorable, but in a city where thousands of women dressed for stardom, the line between recognition and invisibility was thin. Everyone was watching, yet no one truly saw. The year 1947 was also a turning point for Los Angeles. The war had ended, but its aftershocks lingered. Soldiers returned to a city of prosperity and possibility, while organized crime grew bold in exploiting new markets. Corruption seeped into the ranks of the Los Angeles Police Department, where bribes bought silence and influence. For every glamorous premiere at Grauman's Chinese Theater, there was an unreported crime in a backstreet motel. The city itself seemed to invite masks. Architects built glistening theaters, while tenements rotted nearby. Politicians spoke of progress, while bodies were found in vacant lots. It was a city of illusions, where the line between performance and reality blurred daily. Elizabeth, with her dreams of film roles and her habit of dressing like a star, was one of countless figures navigating these fragile illusions. There is something ghostly about Los Angeles in this period. The way the fog rolled in from the ocean at dawn, the way neon lights flickered in the haze at night. The city seemed to shimmer with unreality, as if its very foundation was built on pretending. And in such a place, violence could hide beneath glamour, waiting for a moment to emerge. Elizabeth's presence in Los Angeles was both ordinary and extraordinary. She lived among thousands of hopefuls, yet her fate set her apart forever. In life, she might have been one more woman searching for love and opportunity. In death, she became the embodiment of Los Angeles's darkest truth, that behind the silver screen glimmered something cold and merciless. A symbolic motif here is the clock. The city moved quickly, every hour filled with the rush of ambition. But for Elizabeth, time was not on her side. Each tick of the clock marked another chance lost, another address changed, another fleeting encounter that might have been safety or danger. In Los Angeles, the clock measured not only hours but opportunities, and the missed ones often lingered like ghosts. Philosophically, Los Angeles in the 1942nd was a reflection of desire itself. It offered possibility, but possibility always carries with it the shadow of disappointment. To dream is to risk failure, and in this city, failure often came quietly, leaving behind only fragments of hope. Elizabeth lived on those fragments, piecing together her identity day by day, perhaps unaware that the city she longed to conquer was already shaping the story that would define her. By the time January 1947 arrived, Los Angeles was ready for the story of the Black Dahlia. The newspapers, the gossip columns, the public imagination, all had been conditioned to devour tragedy dressed in beauty. When Elizabeth's body was found, it was not just a crime scene. It was a mirror held up to the city, reflecting the illusions it had built and the darkness that sustained them. In the days leading to her death, Elizabeth Short drifted like a shadow across Los Angeles, her movements fragmented into glimpses recorded by strangers and acquaintances. Each recollection is like a shard of glass, sharp, partial, reflecting something but never the whole. To reconstruct her final days is to piece together a mirror already fractured. Elizabeth was last verifiably seen alive on the 9th of January, 1947, in the company of Robert Red Manley, a married salesman who had been captivated by her beauty. Manley later told police that he had driven her from San Diego to Los Angeles, leaving her at the Biltmore Hotel downtown. There, in the grand lobby with its marble columns and ornate chandeliers, Elizabeth waited, saying she was to meet her sister. The sister never came. Witnesses at the Biltmore reported seeing her linger, her dark clothing setting her apart from businessmen and tourists passing through. At some point, she vanished into the crowd, stepping out into the cold Los Angeles night. After that, her trail dissolves into contradictions. Some claimed they saw her in restaurants or nightclubs. Others said she was at a drugstore or walking alone on dim streets. In truth, the city swallowed her. A woman without a stable home, she was perpetually on the move, and her presence was easily blurred into memory. Police records of sightings grew cluttered, each account plausible, none definitive. There is a strange poignancy in these last fragments. The Biltmore lobby becomes a symbol, its mirrors and marble surfaces reflecting countless lives intersecting for moments before parting forever. Elizabeth, standing there, may have appeared like any other young woman waiting for a companion. Yet the very act of waiting carries a fragile weight. Waiting assumes the future, assumes safety, assumes arrival. For Elizabeth, it would be her last recorded pause in the world's light. The question that lingers is whether someone was already watching her. Several witnesses remarked, after the fact, on a sense of unease, that she often seemed pursued, or that she was wary of men who approached her. In the months before her death, she had told friends she feared being followed. Whether this was paranoia born of hardship or an intuition of real danger, no one can say. Philosophically, one might see in Elizabeth's final days the embodiment of what Søren Kierkegaard once described as the dizziness of freedom. She had choices where to go, whom to meet, how to survive, but each choice opened into uncertainty. Freedom, untethered from security, can become terror. Elizabeth lived in that space, navigating freedom without protection. Her last known days seem both mundane and tragic. A bus ride, a hotel lobby, a cigarette in a diner, a face glimpsed in the crowd. The ordinary scaffolding of a life was still intact, yet within a week she would be transformed into the most infamous murder victim of her generation. There is a motif in these last sightings. Doors. She was seen entering and exiting hotels, cars, cafes, always passing through thresholds, never staying. Doors are symbols of both possibility and peril, and Elizabeth crossed too many of them to count. One door somewhere, with someone led to the place where she would meet her end. By the time she was found in that vacant lot on Norton Avenue, Elizabeth had already slipped through the grasp of those who knew her. What remained were fragments, memories of her passing figure, and the haunting silence of her disappearance. It is that silence which deepens the mystery. She was alive, waiting, walking, seen, and then she was not. When detectives arrived at Norton Avenue on the morning of the 15th of January, they were met with a crime scene so calculated, so disturbingly deliberate, that even hardened men of the Los Angeles Police Department paused in disbelief. The vacant lot, with its scrubby grass and raw earth, seemed less like a place of random violence and more like a stage where some grotesque play had just concluded. Elizabeth Short's body had been carefully arranged. She lay severed at the waist, the two halves of her body positioned a short distance apart. Her arms were bent at unnatural right angles, as though in silent semaphore. Her mouth had been slashed into a gash that stretched toward her ears, a ghastly, mocking smile. There were no signs of blood at the scene, which told investigators she had been killed elsewhere, then transported. She had been drained, cleaned, and displayed. The silence of the lot was deafening. No footprints, no tire tracks, no discarded tools. The ground held no secrets. The killer had been meticulous. Neighbors would later tell police they saw nothing, heard nothing unusual in the night. Whoever carried Elizabeth here moved like a ghost, careful not to disturb the earth or the watchful eyes of the sleeping homes nearby. The precision of the mutilation baffled investigators. It was not the work of someone in a frenzy. This was measured, almost clinical, leading some to suspect a surgeon, or at least someone with training in anatomy. The cut through the body had been made with uncanny skill, separating her in a way known as a hemicorporectomy, a procedure taught in medical schools. To find such a textbook division in a vacant lot was to collide with horror and expertise in the same instant. The pose itself carried a sinister eloquence. Detectives debated its meaning. Was it ritual, sadism, or performance? One officer remarked that it looked like a mannequin displayed in a shop window. Another thought of photographs in crime magazines, where bodies were arranged to shock readers. The body seemed to speak in symbols, but none that could be easily deciphered. There is a motif here. Silence. Not just the silence of the empty lot, but the silence of intent. The killer's choices washing the body, arranging it so precisely, leaving no trace were loud with meaning yet mute in explanation. Elizabeth, who in life had spoken with laughter, with letters, with hope, was now reduced to an image carved in silence. Philosophically, the scene raises the question of what violence seeks to communicate. Ordinary murder ends with death, but this act seemed designed to live on, to be witnessed, to provoke. It was murder as statement, though the language is lost to us. Was it hatred? Control? A message meant only for himself? The silence of the lot holds these questions unanswered. Forensic investigators worked methodically, but each clue seemed to dissolve under scrutiny. The clean body revealed no fingerprints, no fibers, no dirt. The absence of evidence became its own evidence. Proof of premeditation, of someone who took not just time but pleasure in crafting invisibility. Los Angeles had seen many murders, but never one like this. The brutality, the precision, the theatricality, all combined to create an atmosphere of dread. Newspapers would amplify that dread. But even before the headlines, detectives knew. This was no ordinary crime. This was something darker, something that seemed to transform the city itself into a stage of shadows. By afternoon, the lot was swarming with photographers, curious onlookers and crime reporters scribbling furiously. But the crime scene had already given its performance. The body was removed, the earth swept over, the silence restored. Yet the image remained Elizabeth Short, severed, posed, and forever frozen in the collective imagination. The lot itself became infamous. Though in time houses would rise over it, children would play, and the ordinary would resume. But some places never forget. Even as the years pass, the earth beneath Norton Avenue still seems to whisper of the morning when silence spoke louder than any scream. Days after Elizabeth Short's mutilated body was discovered, Los Angeles was gripped not only by horror, but by something colder, stranger, a game. On the 24th of January, 1947, an envelope arrived at the offices of the Los Angeles Examiner. It was crudely assembled, with words cut from newspapers and magazines, pasted into sentences like a ransom note from a film noir. The message promised that the Dahlia's killer would surrender. It was signed, chillingly, the Black Dahlia Avenger. Inside the package was more than bravado. Elizabeth's personal belongings were enclosed: her birth certificate, business cards, photographs, and an address book. Each item had been carefully wiped of fingerprints, as though the killer was flaunting both his intimacy with the victim and his control over the investigation. This was not only murder, it was theater. The newspapers printed the letter, fanning the public's dread and fascination. Within days, more envelopes arrived. Some were typed, others handwritten, many laced with threats or mockery. Detectives scrambled to authenticate them, trying to separate hoaxes from genuine communications. But the real horror was not in whether all the letters came from the same hand. It was that someone was playing with Elizabeth's death like a stage prop, turning her tragedy into a spectacle for an audience of millions. The police pursued every shred of evidence. They traced the envelopes, the type of glue used, the cutout letters. One fingerprint smudge appeared promising, but it led nowhere. Every detail seemed to circle back into the fog. Even the supposed surrender never came. The killer, or those impersonating him, had already achieved what they wanted: the city's attention. The motif here is the newspaper itself. Newsprint, once used to report truth, became the medium of the killer's taunt. Black ink on thin paper carried his voice farther than he could ever speak alone. The killer seemed to understand the machinery of publicity, the way headlines transformed horror into mythology. Elizabeth's death was not only an act of violence, it was curated for public consumption. Philosophically, one might ask whether evil sometimes seeks an audience. In most crimes, concealment is the goal. But in this case, revelation was part of the design. By feeding clues, the killer positioned himself as both criminal and author, shaping how the story would be told. Elizabeth was silenced, but through her stolen belongings, the killer spoke. The letters intensified the frenzy. The Examiner ran sensational headlines, often exaggerating or speculating recklessly, feeding the public's appetite for lurid detail. Citizens mailed in tips by the hundreds, claiming to have seen suspicious men, overheard confessions, or even known the killer personally. The line between fact and fiction blurred until the investigation itself began to resemble the scripts of the very crime dramas Hollywood was producing. For detectives, the taunts carried a bitter weight. Each envelope was a reminder of failure, of being outmaneuvered. The killer, or killers, had taken the investigation hostage, dictating its tempo, dragging police into a performance they could not control. The city watched, entranced, as crime became spectacle, and spectacle became history. In the end, the letters faded as quickly as they had arrived. The trail grew cold, and the avalanche of hoaxes drowned any chance of clarity. Yet their effect was lasting. They had sealed Elizabeth Short's fate not only as a murder victim, but as the centerpiece of a macabre narrative spun by both killer and press. And so the game ended. Or perhaps it never truly did. Each time a new theory emerges, each time her name is invoked, the killer's voice echoes again, faintly, through the clippings and headlines. The letters may have ceased, but the performance never truly stopped. From the moment Elizabeth Short's body was found, the hunt for her killer became one of the most expansive investigations in Los Angeles history. Detectives questioned hundreds of people, sifted through thousands of leads, and assembled a gallery of suspects so vast that the truth seemed to dissolve in its sheer number. Yet among this shadowed parade, certain figures emerged, each cloaked in contradictions, each reflecting a fragment of possibility. One of the earliest suspects was Robert Red Manley, the salesman who had been the last confirmed person to see Elizabeth alive. He admitted to driving her to the Biltmore Hotel, then leaving her there. His story never wavered, and while he was subjected to intense questioning, even a lie detector test, nothing tied him to the murder. He was released, though suspicion would linger around him for years. Then came the flood. Doctors, soldiers, drifters, men Elizabeth had dated or briefly known, each name was scrutinized, each story probed for cracks. One man, an ex-boyfriend, was reported to have been jealous. Another was said to have been violent. Some suspects were cleared within hours. Others haunted the case for decades. The most infamous of them all was Dr. George Hodel, a wealthy physician whose name surfaced years later, revived by his own son, a retired LAPD detective who believed his father was the killer. Hodel was known for his intelligence, his eccentric parties, and his troubling relationships with women. He lived in a house designed like a fortress, a modernist mansion with secret corners and dark rumors. At one point, police even wiretapped his home, recording conversations in which he appeared to allude to the Dahlia case. Yet no charges were ever filed, and the evidence, though compelling, remained circumstantial. Others loomed in the shadows of suspicion. A nightclub owner with ties to organized crime, a string of servicemen linked by chance encounters. Even a woman was briefly considered, though the brutality of the crime suggested otherwise. The Black Dahlia investigation became a magnet for obsession, each new suspect reflecting the anxieties of the city: corruption, lust, power, betrayal. The motif here is the shadow. Each man cast one, stretching across Elizabeth's story, but none stood clear in the light. The shadows overlapped, blurred, and deepened until the truth itself seemed hidden among them. Detectives, exhausted and frustrated, spoke of chasing phantoms, of suspects who appeared convincing until their alibis held firm. Philosophically, the proliferation of suspects reveals something unsettling about human memory and desire. Faced with a mystery, people project onto it. Every suspect became a screen onto which the city cast its fears. The corrupt doctor, the jealous lover, the wandering drifter. In this way, the Black Dahlia case was not just an investigation into a murder. It was an X-ray of Los Angeles itself, showing the fractures beneath its glittering surface. In the years since, books and documentaries have revived these suspects, weaving them into theories that promise resolution. Yet with each retelling, certainty slips further away. The sheer number of possibilities ensures that no single explanation feels definitive. The Black Dahlia killer remains faceless, a silhouette in a doorway, a voice lost in static. The LAPD eventually filed away the case as unsolved, but detectives never truly abandoned it. For decades, they would revisit the files, following new tips, testing new techniques, only to return again to silence. Suspects faded, died, or disappeared, but the shadows they left remain, and perhaps that is part of the enduring power of the case. The killer was never named, never caged, never forced to speak. He or she exists forever just beyond reach, hidden in the dark corridors of history. For Elizabeth Short, this meant that justice was never delivered. For Los Angeles, it meant that the city would always live with a phantom. Almost overnight, Elizabeth Short's death ceased to be just a murder case. It became a cultural phenomenon. The newspapers, hungry for circulation in a post-war city swelling with readers, found in the Black Dahlia a story that combined all the ingredients of noir: beauty, violence, mystery, and sex. They transformed her into a headline siren, a femme fatale who seemed plucked from the very movies Hollywood was producing. Reporters dug mercilessly into her past. They painted Elizabeth as a drifter, a party girl, a woman who courted danger by living off the kindness of men. Photographs of her were published again and again, smiling, alluring, framed by her dark curls, while the lurid details of her death filled column after column. The contrast between her radiant face and her mutilated body proved irresistible to a public obsessed with both glamour and horror. But in that process, the woman vanished. Elizabeth Short, who once wrote tender letters home to her mother, who laughed with friends in small cafes, who dreamed of film roles, was replaced by an invention, the Black Dahlia, an identity imposed by newspapers, a persona stripped of nuance. Even the name, though elegant, was cruel. It branded her not as herself, but as a legend of death. Hollywood could not resist the pull. Screenwriters and directors saw in her case a ready-made story, a mirror of the film noir scripts already popular in theaters. Within years, films began echoing her tragedy, fictionalized victims, women in peril, killers who mutilated with ritualistic precision. She became less a person than a template, an archetype of the doomed starlet. The motif here is the mask. In life, Elizabeth wore a mask shaped by Hope, the aspiring actress, the mysterious girl in black. In death, the city placed another upon her, the Black Dahlia, eternal, unspeaking, exotic, tragic. Neither mask revealed the full woman behind it. Instead, they trapped her between image and myth. Philosophically, this transformation reveals a cruel truth. Fame and anonymity are not opposites but twins. Elizabeth, who struggled to be seen in life, achieved immortality in death, but at the cost of her identity. She became famous, but not as herself. Her legend devoured her reality. The press frenzy also left scars. Elizabeth's family in Massachusetts was hounded relentlessly, confronted with headlines that distorted their daughter into something unrecognizable. Her mother, Phoebe, was told of her daughter's death by a reporter posing as someone offering her a chance at a Hollywood prize. It was a deception that mirrored the city itself, offering dreams, delivering devastation. Yet for the public, the Dahlia became part of Los Angeles' mythology, woven into the same fabric as the Hollywood sign. the neon glow of Sunset Boulevard, and the shadows of film noir. She was no longer simply a victim of a crime. She was the city's dark muse, a reminder that beneath glamour lurked decay. Even today, her story persists in novels, films, songs, and endless speculation. The Black Dahlia is less a case file and more a cultural echo chamber, repeated until fact and fiction are indistinguishable. Her legend walks hand in hand with Los Angeles itself, beautiful, deceptive, haunted, and in this way, Elizabeth Short achieved what she had once dreamed of in her letters and auditions. She became unforgettable, but not as the actress she hoped to be. Instead, as the Black Dahlia, the role no one chooses, the part no one escapes. Nearly 8 decades have passed since Elizabeth Short's body was found in that empty lot. Yet the Black Dahlia remains one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. Police files have grown brittle, witnesses have died, suspects have faded into dust. And still, the questions linger like smoke that refuses to dissipate. Who killed her? Why was the crime staged with such precision, such cruelty, such theatrical silence? Was it the work of a single mind? Or a collaboration hidden in the shadows of Los Angeles' underworld? The answers remain elusive. Detectives pursued leads for years, and amateur investigators have pursued them for decades more. Each new generation discovers the case as though for the first time, reopening the files, reviving old suspects, presenting new theories. Forensic science has advanced, but with so little preserved evidence, even the promise of DNA testing seems futile. What remains is not evidence, but echoes. Elizabeth Short herself has become inseparable from the questions. To speak of the Black Dahlia is to enter a labyrinth where fact and myth coil together. Was she an innocent dreamer destroyed by a predator, or a woman who courted danger in a city of illusions? The truth, perhaps, is both and neither. She was a young woman, alive with hope and fear, caught in forces far larger than herself. To reduce her to either saint or siren is to misunderstand her humanity. The motif here is the photograph. Dozens of images of Elizabeth survive posed portraits, casual snapshots, frozen smiles. In each, she seems alive, vibrant, unfinished. These photographs are all the world has left of her, yet they deceive us. They give the illusion of intimacy, as if we know her, when in truth we only know her face. Like the crime itself, the photograph conceals as much as it reveals. Philosophically, the Black Dahlia invites reflection on the human need for closure. We crave endings, explanations, justice. A solved crime reassures us that the world makes sense, but this case denies that comfort. Its very absence of resolution has become part of its power. Elizabeth's murder unsettles because it insists on remaining open, uncontained, unresolved. In this way, her story is not simply about death, but about the endurance of uncertainty. Los Angeles has grown beyond recognition since 1947. The vacant lot on Norton Avenue has long been filled, houses now standing where Elizabeth's body once lay. Children play, sprinklers hum, the ordinary rhythms of life continue. Yet the ground remembers. In every retelling, the lot becomes sacred in its own dark way, not for what is built upon it, but for what it once revealed about the city's soul. And so the Black Dahlia remains not only a case file, but a haunting presence. Writers, filmmakers, detectives, dreamers all return to her, drawn by the same questions that first stirred the morning her body was found. The crime has become a mirror, reflecting our own obsessions, with beauty, with violence, with mystery, with the need to make sense of chaos. Elizabeth Short was 22 when her life ended, still waiting for her story to begin. Instead, her story became endless, retold in whispers and headlines, novels and films, theories and confessions. Perhaps that is her tragedy, but also her strange immortality. In the silence of her case, she endures. And maybe that is the final truth. The Black Dahlia cannot be solved, only remembered. She is frozen in time, a dark flower blooming eternally in the city of illusions. Her shadow cast across every streetlight and silver screen. The questions remain, and in their persistence, so does she.